Even if your BMI is normal, even if you're normal weight, you can still be profoundly unhealthy. The scale and the mirror could be lying to you. You could be skinny fat. You could have what's called normal weight obesity. Check out these two people. If you met them on the street, you'd have a hard time telling who was healthier inside. They look fairly similar, but their body fat percentages are totally different. And what's happening in terms of their cardiovascular risk is also different. Normal weight obesity is a national crisis. Over 30 million Americans are in this danger zone because there's dangerous fat all over your organs that can't be perceived by your eyes. This is about 20% of people. It increases the risk of metabolic syndrome by 92%, high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cholesterol problems. So I'm going to go over how you can figure out if you're in this phenotype and what you can do about it. We're going to talk about why BMI doesn't work for a lot of people. What are the risk factors? There's even interesting racial differences to consider, which metrics to talk about with your doctor, and what blood tests could be helpful, and then how to actually fix this stuff to get out of this danger zone if you're in it. I'm Dr. Haque. I'm a Harvard-trained doctor here to provide you with evidence-based insights to help empower you with your health. Of course, this is not personal medical advice. If you're interested in more of a deep dive and some of my own personal takes, check out my newsletter, medicalwisdom.org, which is where I learn from a lot of you about what you're interested in. So BMI in general can correlate with a lot of bad outcomes, but sometimes, especially for people who have normal weight, it can be a false measure of health. One person could have more muscle, another person could have more dangerous fat. They could have the same weight. And it's not what you think. Mostly when you think about BMI misleading you, you think of this kind of thing where one person is just super athletic, the other person has a higher percent of fat. It's not that simple. It's more like what I showed you earlier. These two people who basically look identical, but on the inside, they're very different. You can't really tell with your eyes, and you certainly can't tell with the scale because they're both normal weight. So the unhealthy inside is what is the dangerous part. You can be structurally obese. You can be biochemically obese, even though you're not gravity obese in terms of the scale. Many people have a false sense of security because the screenings look good. The doctors will say, hey, yeah, your BMI is 24, 27, no worries. And the person might skip essential screenings. They may not think about getting ahead of cardiovascular disease protection before they have their first heart attack at a young age. And remember, a lot of the organ damage that shows up in, for example, diabetes is happening when things are already fairly gone. Your pancreas cells have a high percentage of damage already. So the goal is to get ahead of this with preventative medicine. And the only way to do that is to really know what's going on in your body. Here we have people who are underweight, normal weight, overweight, and obese. And this is heart disease risk, coronary heart disease. And then on the bottom here is the risk of them having that thing. So if you just look at people who are normal weight right here, you can see if they have 0 metabolic abnormalities or 1 metabolic abnormality, that could be like high cholesterol or high insulin. Within the category of normal weight, what you see is a huge spread in people's actual heart disease risk. So take somebody who's normal weight but has 3 metabolic abnormalities. They're going to have 2.3 times the risk of heart disease. But now look at somebody who's obese and has 0 metabolic abnormalities. They only have a 1.5 times the risk. And somebody who's overweight with 0 metabolic abnormalities has like 1.3 times the risk. So you're looking at dozens of percentage points differences, even hundreds of percentage point differences based on not necessarily what the scale says, but what's going on inside. But I just find that amazing that somebody who's obese, BMI over 30, but 0 metabolic abnormalities could have a much lower risk of heart disease than somebody who has a normal weight. That's amazing. Now think of cerebrovascular disease like early strokes. You meet somebody in their 40s who's having word finding difficulties. Somebody gets an MRI or a CT scan and they're in their 30s or 40s and they see all these spots and they're like, talking to the radiologist, why would that be happening to me? Well, this could be one of those reasons. You could have white matter changes. Somebody could be normal weight. Look at normal weight, 3 metabolic abnormalities, 60% higher risk of cerebrovascular disease compared to somebody who's obese with 0 metabolic abnormalities, has almost no increased risk. So this is profound, profound stuff. And if someone can get ahead of this, you can really prevent a lot of these bad outcomes. So as I mentioned, BMI is an old tool. It's very blind to muscle and it's blind to where that fat is in your body. Percent muscle, and where is it distributed. So we're not going to spend too much time on this. Everyone knows this. In terms of where the fat's stored, as I mentioned, visceral fat is dangerous fat. And visceral fat isn't just around your intestines. We're also talking about liver fat and then fat actually in your muscles. A lot of people store fat within their muscles. And all of this fat is leaking inflammatory cytokines. It's like smoking a cigarette every day. Those toxins are going directly into the portal vein. That's going directly to the rest of your system, going through your liver, causing your liver to get fatty liver. So this is the key thing you want to know. And that's why many people get DEXA scans. But being skinny fat has a 90% higher chance of having high triglycerides, 83% abnormal LDL cholesterol, and 50% higher chance of blood glucose. Things like insulin resistance, prediabetes. So these are all the people who show up to the primary care doctor when it's too late, in their 30s, they're in their 40s, and they're shocked. How could I have an LDL of 195? How could I have prediabetic hemoglobin A1C? Look at me. I'm not really overweight. I'm not really fat. In addition, we know the skinny fat phenotype increases death. Diabetes-related death up 129%, blood pressure-related death up almost 70%, and heart disease death 40% higher. So even when somebody has these conditions, if they have this skinny fat phenotype, they're at a higher risk. It's just not something you want, and it's not something you want to keep if you have it. There's other tests that can be higher as well, specifically inflammation. Like I mentioned, those inflammatory molecules are going all over your body. So you can detect that with high sensitivity CRP, HSCRP. That's going to be higher. Metabolic syndrome is going to be higher. Subclinical atherosclerosis, blocked arteries, diabetes developing sooner. Serious stuff. When it comes to skinny fat, race does matter. There's different bodies, different risks, even at the same BMI. For example, the World Health Organization has different cutoffs for overweight and obesity based on race, specifically for Asians, South Asians, and East Asians. But we know different people store fat in different places, even at the same BMI. Specifically, South Asians and Hispanics have higher risks of diabetes even at lower weights. So for example, with South Asians, 44% of normal weight South Asians have 2 or more metabolic abnormalities. That's an extremely high number. For someone, if you saw them on the street, you wouldn't be able to tell that. And what's the percentage for other racial groups? For Hispanic and Latino Americans, it's 39%, Chinese Americans, 32%, African Americans, 31%, and for European Americans or white Americans, 21%. These are the percentage of people who have 2 or more metabolic abnormalities like high blood glucose, insulin, cholesterol at a normal BMI. And we don't really know why this is. It's probably some genetic factors. So because of these variables, the Lancet published a new framework for defining obesity in 2025. And the idea is it goes towards these other metrics like percent fat and waist circumference as opposed to just weight, because it's a better way to detect how many people are at risk of obesity-related complications. So somebody could have preclinical obesity where they have high visceral fat, but they don't yet have the end organ damage. They don't have diabetes. They don't have kidney failure. They're not showing advanced liver decompensation or even any abnormalities on labs. So things are preclinical even though they have obesity. They have high percent fat. And then clinical obesity has been redefined as where you have organ dysfunction, fatty liver, sleep apnea, diabetes, arthritis, heart disease. And the actual diagnostic criteria, how do you actually determine whether you have obesity? It could be any of these 3 options. You could have a high BMI plus elevated waist circumference, or you could have 2 of these elevated waist metrics like waist to hip ratio, waist to height ratio, even if you have a normal BMI. Or if you just have high body fat percentage on a DEXA scan using x-rays, even if your BMI is normal. So there's 3 ways to define obesity now. They're not just based on BMI. I know this is a little confusing, so in case it's helpful, I made a PDF guide with the measurements and lab markers that you might want to check out and the questions you might want to ask your doctor. If you're interested, check out the link in the description for the free PDF sign up. And what happened when the Lancet used this new filter is they found out, in America at least, they thought that 43% of Americans had obesity, but it went up to 69%. So about a 60% relative increase in detection, which is huge, no pun intended. It's a huge difference. And what this means is more people who are vulnerable are being detected and can get help. And maybe we'll have medications covered and other services covered. What is interesting is also 1 in 4 of these newly classified obese people were skinny fat. So their BMI would have been below the threshold previously. So how can you tell if you're skinny fat? One way is to look at waist circumference. So for males, the increased risk is going to be about 37 inches for Black, Hispanic, and white or European Americans, and 40 centimeters for high risk. So this is like overweight versus obese kind of analogies. And for women, 31.5 and 35 inches. And then for South Asians, East Asians, and Middle Easterners, for males, the overweight category is 31.5 inches, and 35 is really the high risk threshold in terms of inches, and 31.5 for females who are Middle Eastern or Asian. So this is a quick metric that you can keep track of at home by yourself just to know where you're at. Here's some other clues that you may be skinny fat or normal weight obesity. Of course, normal BMI, but lack of muscle tone. You go to the gym, you can't really gain muscle. Soft or protruding abdomen despite an overall slim build. Somebody's fairly skinny, but they have a large protruding abdomen, which is just visceral fat. Skinny arms, legs with a belly. Also, doing a calorie restricted diet or exercise doesn't really produce much of a response. People will often lose a lot more muscle than others on calorie restricted diets. And then the classic metabolic lab abnormalities that we talked about: glucose, lipids, inflammation, high blood pressure, poor exercise recovery, and difficulty building strength and muscle. Couple clues. There's no objective clinical checklist for this kind of thing, but these are some of the clinical cues. Another metric you can use is waist to hip ratio, which is very helpful. This clearly defines cardiometabolic risk. So you take your waist circumference, which is above your hip bones, and then you divide that by your hip circumference, which is measured at the widest point of the buttocks. So for example, this person here would have a waist hip ratio of something like 0.65, something like that. And for males and females, basically 0.9 is when you want to worry. But you can also just look in the mirror, and if you see an apple distribution, if you have a belly that's bigger than your hips, probably you have a problem with this ratio. Another metric is body fat percentage, which does correlate somewhat with visceral fat and belly fat. But for males, overweight 25% and obese 30%, and for females, overweight 36% and obesity 42%. These aren't universal cutoffs. There's no hard and fast rules here, but these are where some of the best evidence suggests people should be looking. So personally, I try to go under 25% for body fat percentage. That's my goal. And because I am of Middle Eastern and Asian ancestry, I try to go under 31.5 inches for waist circumference. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. The other thing is, when you have a body fat percentage, you have to look at everything else to know how dangerous that body fat percentage is. As I mentioned, if somebody has normal weight, but they have central obesity, if they have high visceral fat, if they have a gut, they're going to be high risk even if their total body fat percentage is not really that high. So remember that picture of that guy I showed you, the two guys? I think he had like 21% body fat. But if he had high central obesity, that would be more concerning than somebody without that with the same body fat percentage. So think about muscle mass. Interestingly enough, the amount of muscle somebody has in their arms and legs will predict frailty and predict mortality as people age. That's a metric you can also get on a DEXA scan. Fitness level, male versus female, racial and ethnic and genetic factors. And then, is there any actual organ dysfunction? Remember, if your A1C is high, if your insulin is high, you're getting towards organ dysfunction, and you got to take it seriously. There's other blood tests that I would look for. Fasting insulin is never really tested by primary care. You have to ask for it specifically. But it's such an important metric because it's like a pre-diabetes, and you can really tell what's happening in terms of how your insulin receptors are doing and whether you're on your way to insulin resistance. HOMA-IR is a calculation you can do online when you have your fasting glucose and insulin. Triglyceride to HDL ratio is a great way to look at your cholesterol numbers and calculate additional risk. And then liver enzymes. Those don't really go up until you really have more than mild fatty liver. So you can definitely see them creeping up within the normal range. Because remember, the normal range is just a spectrum. So before you get advanced fatty liver, they're going to be creeping up into the mid 30s, high 30s, low 40s, whatever. So don't just look at a normal range and say, oh yeah, it's just like almost abnormal. You're getting there. So you want to reverse it as soon as you see something creeping up. And remember, the gold standard is a DEXA scan. That's where you sit down and the x-rays go across your body. It's fairly low risk, and most cities have one these days. You can just Google DEXA scan in your city. You should be able to find one, but they're not covered by insurance because they're for body composition. I'd like to now share my protocol for success. Remember, if somebody's skinny fat, they need to focus on muscles. So heavy resistance training to build strength, to build metabolically active muscle tissue is really important, because muscle is going to be where all that extra glucose goes, and it's going to balance out the high percent body fat, and it's going to be better for metabolism too. Many people who are skinny fat are running a lot. They're doing a lot of cardio, and they're noticing things aren't really changing. It's because somebody who's skinny fat is going to need more emphasis on regular resistance training. Cardio is good too. Zone 2 is great. Zone 2 cardio is great. The other thing is protein. You have to really calculate how much protein you're getting based on your body size. Anywhere from 1.0 to 1.8 grams per kilogram. Talk to a nutritionist, talk to your primary care doctor. Try to figure out how much protein is right for you. But definitely a lot of people undereat protein. It makes you more full. It's not going to spike insulin. It's not going to signal as much to hold on to that visceral fat. And muscles will be more likely to grow. Processed carbs, of course, everyone knows that's terrible for you, but it's really hard to quit. It's like an addictive drug. Simple sugars, processed foods, these things really connect to visceral fat. They go right to your liver and mess everything up. Sleep is so important and the easiest fix for a lot of people because they're unconscious. So if you can really focus on getting 8 hours of quality sleep without interruption, using earplugs, using an eye mask, going through all the basic sleep hygiene, this is going to keep your cortisol levels lower, and cortisol builds up visceral fat. And so does stress. Stress spikes cortisol. So focusing on stress management, doing what you have to do to stay ahead of that is really important for people who are skinny fat. And then track your metric, because no matter how bad things are, you need to know if you're getting worse or you're getting better. Measure all those waist and numbers, measure your biochemical profile, and keep track of things. Empower yourself. Don't depend on your doctor. Your doctor's going to see you for a couple minutes every 3 months. You really need to take charge of your own health. And once again, if it's helpful, feel free to download a free PDF that summarizes a lot of these key facts for you to take home, because some of it's confusing, in case it helps you when you're talking to your doctor or doing more research. I really hope you've learned from this. It's such an important topic. I really hope you benefited from this. Check out this other video, or feel free to join my newsletter, medicalwisdom.org, where I go into more deeper dives and provide some of my own personal takes on things. Take care.